30 seconds, Jesse.
Yeah. As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some main vision, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, get up.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Right. Salutations, Connecticut. Salutations, the world. And I have some thank yous today. So thank you to Tom Ficklin for this time on the air. Thank you for 103.5 New Haven Radio for this time. And thank you to these four amazing corn mothers, leaders in preservations of language and culture and dignity and all the wonderful things. Connecticut, you are about to have a treat. So we'll begin today. I'll ask and we're going to talk about the intersectionality of language, culture, and literacy. And we just have fantastic people to do that over here. And I love the fact that my guests are coming from Arizona, because Arizona is the ground zero for ethnic studies. It's the ground zero for fighting to be able to have our stories told in communities. I think the last time I was in Arizona, Angie, the Supreme Court had just thrown out the ban against ethnic studies in Arizona. So it's like almost everything that you ladies stand for, the state often fights against. And I think the Governor Hobbs just vetoed the bill that would have banned the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools. So, but anyway, let us begin with our guest, and I'll ask them all to introduce themselves. So, Geneva, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your passions?
Yes, buenos dias. Good
Buenos dias.
Geneva Escobedo. I have been retired now about 5 years, which I'm totally enjoying. I have worked in higher education, both at the university and community college level for over 30 years. And my passion has always been education and helping others achieve their degree. And I've done that in many ways. Overseen student services, recruited students, helped with retention programs, developed grants to support students through their educational programs. So my work life really involved a lot of issues around higher education, preparing those that were underprepared for higher ed. They call it developmental education. I spent a lot of years there. But lately, my passion is writing. I'm a fairly new author. You know, I decided after I retired, I'm going to write and I'm going to publish my first book, which I did. It's called Dichos de mi Padre, Sayings of My Father, which is a lot about the Mexican culture and passing down those sayings or dichos to the next generation. So I wrote a book about it so youngsters could read, and I'm working on promoting that.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So we know your passion. All right. And Octaviana, and I know I just butchered her name and she's going to be mad at me, but she's going to pronounce it right. I mean, I'm here with linguists who are defending languages in the nation and perfect speakers in multiple tongues. I'm sorry there, but introduce yourself and tell us all about you.
Leos and Chanea, Kechemalea. Good morning. And Jesse, you're wonderful. So no, it's not just you, it's so many others that see my long name and then they shorten it. So I always have to try to stand up for my grandmother. I was named after my grandmother. I am a professor emerita of applied Indigenous studies at Northern Arizona University. I've been a professor at all three state universities. in Arizona. I began my professional academic career at the University of Arizona. Then I was recruited to Arizona State University. And then I was recruited to Northern Arizona University to begin the Applied Indigenous Studies Department. Currently, I am a Soros Equality Fellow, doing work with Indigenous peoples along the border, protecting sacred sites, gathering grounds, really access and mobility for Indigenous peoples along the border. And I'm also the current chair for the Joint Public Advisory Committee for the Commission of North America for Environmental Cooperation between Canada, US, and Mexico. And I'm very happy to be part of this gathering this morning. Beautiful morning. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Cepeda, you can introduce yourself and tell us all about you. And we know your passion is in twofold: preserving languages, poetry, and the desert. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Ophelia Cepeda. I'm Jatimia Tanatam Hajotikam, Homonia Hapata Ea Juksonum. Yes, he's up on that. Nakokao worm journey or the journey. Again, Ophelia Cepeda, and I'm Tanatam, and I currently live here in the city of Tucson and work here at the University of Arizona. I'm faculty in the Department of Linguistics, and I'm also the director of the American Indian Language Development Institute, which is housed in the College of Education. Of course, the other thing I do is write poetry. And I've been in this work of education, especially language education and research, for all of my adult career. That's what I started in, and I'm still working in that area currently. I have 4 books of poetry, and I write both in my first language, O'odham, and also in English. And currently, my work has been focusing on graduate students, Native graduate students who have an interest and desire to get academically trained in linguistics, to work on their own language, to benefit their own community. Because as you know, historically, we've always had outsiders work on our languages and pretty much dictate the descriptions and more recently the teaching of our languages. So now we have young people, and then of course some mature speakers who are very interested in getting training and become, sort of advocates within their own communities for their own language in all areas of the language. I'm currently have an international role. In 2022, UNESCO began or designated the beginning of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. And anyway, so of course it's going to go on for 10 years. And I was selected as the representatives to the International Task Force for the decade. So I attend international meetings primarily on Zoom. Well, initially to do some of the planning, and then of course promote activities around the International Decade. So anyway, so that's what I'm doing now besides my writing.
Yeah, and we could, not only a decade, we need a lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent, great work. Angie, can you, Dr. Listo, can you tell us about you? And I know Angie very well. We work together. So that should be fun. All right, go ahead, sister.
Good Saturday, Moose Chamoy. The Jewel Dam. The Amjet, Donna Autumn, Impad, Saturday Tagyo. Well, I'm Dahag Jesse, how much? Bandasha Jayman, Manani Jugik, Angelina Listo. Amjet Donna Autumn, Hajoadka, Vợ chơi mình si saben tat ngamos I serum what the hai chu hai mushta ngamos come in behalf Jewish dam. I just want to say that I'm very happy. Good morning. Very happy to be here with Jesse and his radio program. And I say a big good morning from the Tonatom Desert to the East Coast, which is Siardiktagyo, where the sun comes up from where I am, where I sit today this morning. And that my work has primarily been in higher education. I've had the opportunity to work in 3 different kind of institutions, starting my career in the longest with Pima Community College here in Tucson, which at the time was the 5th largest community college in the nation and has continued to grow since then in the late 90s. And then I went to serve as Vice President of Student Services for a new tribal college for our nation, Tonatom Community College, and helped to get it accredited and become a full-fledged institution, which is there now to serve the people of the nation, and also serving in land grant Research One University, where Dr. Zepeda is currently. So I had the opportunity of being at University of Arizona, and then my recent and most recent career has been at least a tenure in the tribal gaming business here in Arizona. And so I've done a lot of things, and I always question, why I ended up where I ended up and did the things I did. And I sort of look at myself as a builder of things. It seems that when the calling came, I was called to go do something. And so I followed that. And that's how I ended up doing a lot of things. And one of the things I also question myself is my most recent involvement with a worldwide organization known as Rotary International. And someone asked me, why are you in that, Rotary? It's not native. It's primarily, Anglo people, and there's other countries that are involved and represented in Rotary. And I had to think about it for a while, before I joined, and I thought, it's just an extension of me. It's helping people in my community, helping people in the state of Arizona, and now the opportunity to work, beyond borders internationally. And so I, that just goes back to my core, my fundamental, way of life is being, helping and being a servant to others, making life better for others. So I'm sort of semi-retired, I guess. I took a break from work and trying to define where I fit, or if somebody out there is calling, be a builder of something, I'm here. So that's all.
Would
Thank
be
you.
a fantastic find. Want to bring Angie also did the it's really an amazing dissertation on the mission of the NA College, first tribal college. So that will come into play somewhere along here. But that scholarship is a seminal piece of research in the nation. And I'm sure it would be followed, because next we're going to have Totowatham Community College, all tribal colleges. We can have all those dissertations and all those researchers. But what I want to bring us to this point today, and I think it can connect to something that my own dissertation was on, the Tohono students and Yaqui students in the Upward Bound program with Angie. And one of the things that we did was we shifted the invitation to literacy to be about language, culture, and heritage. And so that meant that reading and that English curriculum on Saturdays was filling students with native authors and native stories, and it often way above their reading levels. And trust me, they met the challenge, no problem over there. But one of the things that what I love the most about the research, in the dissertation only covered 2 years, but I think we did it for 5 years, Angie. And the retention rate, the high school retention rate, if you attended that program on Saturdays for 1 year, was 97.6. That's the retention rate, and it was amazing. So I bring us today to this question, as all across our nation, in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona, I think there's 38 states trying in one way or another, impeding any kind of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Anything Native, anything Black, anything immigrant in the nation seems to be under assault. So I wanted to, and I think we can do it personal stories, because I think those personal narratives matter. I have 4 incredible women on this panel today as guests who have moved that intersectionality, who have overcome obstacles with literacy. And when I look at the 4 of you, and I've studied your work all week long, I realized that language and culture was really a key and a door and empowering, and that, to that literacy intersectionality. So I'm going to follow that pattern. I'm going to go the opposite this time. So I have Angelina, then I'll go to Ophelia and Octaviana, and then Geneva. And what I'll say is, can you share a little bit about your literacy journey? So Angie, if you can share that and how it impacted culture and language and all those things, and most of our schooling, is it that much removed from boarding schools, in the sense that how much of our schooling is about who we are as a people? So Angelina, you're up.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that question. And I have to acknowledge my elders here. I like the introduction. The way that it started was with the 3 women, Geneva, Octaviana, and Ophelia. And I respect them because they're women, Native women, Indigenous women, and also that they're older than me. And so I would have the opportunity to speak before them at this time, starting out, explaining or sharing some of my literacy journey. So I just want to start by saying that I grew up on the Tohono Nation reservation. And at that time, our family had moved from what is now Green Valley. It was Continental, Arizona. There was a place out there that our families lived in the farms, helping to pick cotton, and some ranching work was done at that farm. And I lived there for 10 years of my life. And I started school there and have really faint memories of that. And then because our family was growing from 3 siblings and our parents and another one coming along the way, and they decided to move us all back to where I grew up and my father's place on the reservation. So I went into a mission school there, and that's where I started. And it was like a 2-room schoolhouse, and we didn't have very much. It was a mission school, and our parents sort of they reinforced reading, and our place had no electricity and no running water, and every evening before supper they would put on a gas lamp so we could sit around the table and read, the kids, the 3 of us that were going to school. And so they reinforced that. And what I remember of any kind of reading material coming into the home, it was the Life magazine. You may remember that. It was a big magazine called Life magazine. And I remember looking through that, looking at photos, and then I remember seeing John F. Kennedy, reading about him and seeing the pictures when he was shot in Dallas. And so that kind of left an imprint, in terms of reading, and I kept that Lifetime magazine. I still have it somewhere in my collection, my archives, but we also, our parents had ordered a book, a collection of books like Sleeping Beauty and all those children's books, and they put a shelf just for those books, and I think it was like 5 or 6 of the major children's stories, and so we would share that and read that. And I think today my older sister got that collection of books in her home now, moved it from our parents' home where we grew up, and she has it in her home. So reading was always reinforced, and but I still had a difficult time reading. I would say the same all through my college education. Had a difficult time reading because I still didn't have a command or master, English language, and so I always carried a dictionary with me so that I could, look up a word that I've heard for the first time and, try to learn it. And my dictionary is actually on my bookshelf, the one that I had carried through college, and a little paperback dictionary, and it's all worn out. But that's the story that I have, with my literacy journey. And so, I have to share this. It wasn't until I got to the University of Arizona that I began reading something that was in autumn. And that, of course, is from the course that I took with Dr. Cepeda on the autumn language. And so I started seeing, writings about native history, native traditions, native culture. And I was just having a conversation the other day, and I said, I had to wait until I got to the university to read anything native, anything about culture, whether it was my own or, the about other native people, other indigenous people. So, I thought it was backwards. It should have been in the elementary schools. It should have been in junior high. It should have been in high school. But I had to wait until I got to college to read all this wonderful histories that are out there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true for many people. Lots of public education is devoid of any culture, devoid of it's just insane. But for Native people, for Latin people, it's Angie. I remember we did a tribal presentation, and we looked at traditional ways of Anglo kinds of learning, reading, writing, and speaking, and we looked at what was not included. And I remember with the tribal council, I put things like dance, heritage, culture. We dropped them in on the little PowerPoint color slide, which was big back then, and eyes lit up. And I remember us saying to them, if these things could be part of schooling, we know that our students would be more engaged and stuff. But let's go. Dr. Cepeda, since we heard you were a tough grader too. So if Angie passed your class, you don't go easy on Native people. I know that. I had people who've been in your class, but Dr. Cepeda, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey, and it would be a delight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Well, Angie's always been a good student. Very similar to Angie, growing up, just I've always been off reservation. And the reason for that is because my parents, both of them their traditional home is on the Sonora side of Autumn land. And so they came into the US in the 40s and 50s and, sort of settled on the edges of the reservation. And so we ended up in a little cotton farming community called Stanfield, Arizona. And that's where my siblings and I were born and raised. off reservation, and like Angie's family, we worked farm labor. Our parents did, picking cotton, because that time, that's the way it was done, by hand. So we picked cotton. Both my parents did, and we also did as children. We had to help our parents, and so we were just out there, sort of, in a way, isolated, because there were camps, in Arizona with these large farms. There were camps set up by the ranchers that housed people who did the labor there, and a lot of them were O'odham. Many O'odham would come off the reservation, lived there seasonally, and then go back. We lived there permanently, and there were others as well. Mostly, of course, people of color would come and do the seasonal work. Anyway, so because of where we lived, I went to a public school, and all of us, my siblings, we started school very late, because my parents and no one across their generation ever went to school. No one before them ever went to school. So they just didn't have that as part of, their world. And so we were, of course, back then they had truant officers that would drive around the fields and pick up random children that were supposed to be in school. And that was our introduction to schooling. And it wasn't too traumatic, So we all started late. We have these class pictures. We're always the biggest ones in the classroom because we're off schedule. And of course, none of us spoke English because our parents didn't. And so we had that, to deal with. And of course, some of the Arizona, all the Arizona people here, those of you in College of Ed, and I know Jesse, the Goodmans, who did all the work on literacy and here in reading. I was part of one of their studies, and one of the questions was how they just assumed they had a traumatic experience with not being able to speak English when they entered school. And of course, back then you didn't have bilingual ed and so forth. And it was one of those, what they call, so I was a product of the sink or swim method. They just put you in there and you sit there and see what happens. So I was one of the people that decided to swim and picked up English, and took me a couple of repeats of grades, and all of us did that. The Hispanic children that were in our school area did the same thing. So anyway, so it wasn't that traumatic. Teachers never said anything to you about using your language, because we were using it with our brothers and sisters just to survival language in the school setting. So which is a whole nother story. But the reading part, the reading and writing of English, once I started it, I enjoyed it. I don't know why, but I did. And I have a sister just younger than me who is an avid reader from early on. As soon as she became literate, she was reading everything. And I don't know, back then the schools would clean out at the end of the semester, clean out the old textbooks and stuff like that. And they put them out and they tell us we could, if you want something, you can take it. And we took everything that we could. We took math books, geography books, history books, English grammar books, and we just took them home. And these were all hardcover books, because back then that's the way schools had books. And so that was our library, with those used, discarded books from the schools. And especially my younger sister and I, we loved using those books. We taught ourselves a lot during the summertime. We taught ourselves geography, American history, and some of the classic early writers. I tended to gravitate to them, which is strange. William Faulkner was one of my favorite writers, and I never realized, well, it's because he's writing about people and family in hard times, which is kind of like Indian people, family and hard times. So I really enjoyed that work, and it taught me a lot about American culture. That's what it did, and gave me perspective on my own, and seeing where we sort of fit, and also trying to understand how, when things happened, the divisions, the hierarchies, between white and Indians, white and Hispanic children, you started to figure that out very early on. And I understood it better from my reading other people and their perspectives from other parts of the US. So since then, like I said, I've always enjoyed reading, not so much writing, but later I found out in high school and onward that I could write, and some, my teachers did tell me I could write. I could write stories. My grammar was terrible. I nearly failed my first, English, freshman English, because of that. But a lot of Native people struggle with that, the grammar part. And like Angie, I didn't see the O'odham language written until I got to college. And that was my motivation for wanting to learn how to read and write O'odham, was because I saw one book written in O'odham. And I had somebody teach me O'odham, and that was sort of the beginning of my interest in looking at my own language from that perspective, as a written form, and, teaching about it and using it. So anyway, so that's a little bit about myself. Thank you.
That's a perfect piece before we go to Octaviana. A story, a little short story of Tohono O'odham elder Danny Lopez, who used to visit my classroom, and Danny passed away, but he always had this beautiful way of talking to our kids and about language. He one day in class, he said, you need to speak Tohono O'odham. You need to speak your language. If you can't speak your language, you don't know who you are. You won't be able to. You can't be completely Tohono O'odham. You'll be Reebok. He told them. He said, "That's what you'll be. You'll be Reebok." And I remember that. But he was a wonderful visitor. But yes, we come to that, and it's interesting if we do any analysis of especially children's literature. We start finding that overwhelming majorities are Anglicized books, and we're only now starting to grow in some of that diversity, and we're still far behind. And language is, Ophelia, you speak 2 languages, probably 3. I know Octaviana does over there. That should be valued in our schools. But okay, Octaviana, oh, I got to get it right. You can say it one more time for me so I can get it right. I got to get it right. Otherwise, Ophelia's going to fail me in class.
Well, listening to these stories the conversation, the story with that Angie has shared, and Ophelia, we have similar experience with the public schools, with schooling. I was born and raised in Guadalupe, a small village outside of Phoenix. And of course, that public school, Guadalupe School, all the children were Yaqui or Mexican American. And of course, at that time in Arizona, you could only teach in the public schools English. And it was against the law to use any other language but English in the public schools. And of course, punishing anyone that spoke their native language was common by the teachers there, by the principal. And so you learn very, very quickly that you need to learn English. And so, it was a sink or swim. And of course, I too swam and loved reading and continued on my education. However, so many of my other peers did not. You started with a good group of students from Guadalupe at to our high school, but before the second year of high school, most of them had been pushed out of the system and never graduated. I went on to college because of Upward Bound. I am a graduate of the Upward Bound program, and it really helped to make that connection to higher education. And I became the first graduate on both sides of my family, like I'm sure with Ophelia and Angie. And so I persisted. And I think we have that passion, that strength to persist regardless of all these other obstacles. So when I graduated, I became a bilingual teacher, returned back to Guadalupe, became a bilingual teacher, and then during the summers, I started a summer program with the Yaqui so that children could start learning about the Yaqui in the sense of Yaqui literacy. and so that was wonderful that we could promote that, and also started with the Head Start program, the Yaqui language for parents as well as the students and those that could come to teach the Yaqui language. Once I graduated, completed my terminal degree, I joined the Department of Language, Reading, and Culture at the University of Arizona. Of course, that's many of you are familiar with LRC. You come from the work of LRC, and I was then that same year I joined the Pascua Yaqui Tribal Council. I was a reluctant leader, I think, at that time, but I was asked by the elders that they needed someone like me to really help in tribal nation building. So I was able to do both. Fortunately, I was able to still teach at LRC, and I started the first special topics class on the Pascua Yaqui Reservation on Yaqui literacy. And I continue working with the Pascua Yaqui tribe. We're building a early childhood educational center on the reservation. And there's a team of us, including Terry McCarty, that's going to really put the foundation for a very unique curriculum so that we have trilingualism and that we begin with the very young and family literacy. And I'm glad that is happening. And so even though I am formally retired, I seem to be working more now than I ever did before as a volunteer. And I also continue to work with Tohono O'odham Community College. They have a major National Science Foundation with regards to the STEM fields. So I work with wonderful folks there, faculty, including Camillus. Camillus Lopez and I work with the faculty so that we actually bring HIMDUG as part of the curriculum and what is being offered there in incorporating Tohono O'odham linguistically, culturally into the STEM field. So I have much to learn. And I continue on this path of learning and trying to offer help where I can.
Right, excellent. Just before we go to Geneva, I had a conversation with former Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, from the Obama administration, and he kept saying that diverse communities needed grit. And I'm like, they need grit? I don't think you understand that these communities are resilient, have more grit than you ever imagined, have overcome the obstacles. They don't need tough love. They need support. They need resources. They don't need any more grit. And he looked at me like I was insane. But anyway, it's there. Geneva, can you tell us a little bit? By the way, just to give, before we get to Geneva, my daughter went to Tucson schools as a child, arrived in Connecticut. We're supposed to be the first state. So my daughter's teacher sent home a note from her school saying that Erin objected to Connecticut being the first state because Arizona was around long before Connecticut. I forget when we had our founding state, like 1776 or something, that signs onto that document. And she's going, well, we were here like 1,000 years before that. So she went to Drachman Elementary School in Tucson in the barrio, and her teachers made sure to let her know that long before Arizona was part of the United States of America, it was Autumn. It was Yaqui. It was Mexican. Just got to remember that. I just thought that she didn't get in trouble. I went back to the teacher, but was kind of interesting. Geneva, sorry to interrupt you there. But
oh, no, that's fine. Well, listening to these wonderful women triggered some memories of my literacy growing up. I grew up in a small rural community, Safford, Arizona, southeastern Arizona. So my mother didn't finish high school, and my father only went to 8th grade. My mom grew up in a segregated school until they changed the rules. So they really impressed upon me how important education was. And a couple of things I remember that they did to encourage our reading and encourage our interest in education is they would order these scholastic magazines. They would come every month, and I loved them because I could do the activities and I would really get engaged in that. And then as I was going through middle school and high school, they ordered encyclopedias so that we could read about lots of different things. So I really was blessed that they supported us in that way. I always loved English, loved reading. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was from Mexico, from Chihuahua. Her and my grandfather immigrated when they were very young. And she spoke a little bit of English, but she really impressed upon us how important our language is. Háblame en español, speak to me in Spanish. And I'm really glad that I was raised really close to her. I lost her when I was in 8th grade, but her stories made an impression on me, and I think it's because of her that I've become a storyteller through my writing and through my poetry. But I've always loved reading. I read constantly. I do write. Some of my work is in Spanish, mostly the poems that I've published. Not that many, but that's always a part of it. And my writing includes Spanish and just a lot about my culture, which I think it's important to share. I do want to say that the challenges before us again in Arizona is the squashing of diversity and bilingualism and so forth. My book, Dichos de mi Padre, which is my first book, was purchased by Tucson Unified School District in their culturally responsive pedagogy and instruction program. And there's a real concern there that given the state legislature, what that might do to that program. So I asked one of the senior teachers, what's going on? Can we do something? So they're working on putting an advisory board to fight this notion of erasing all of that. And we've worked so hard over the years and been persistent at fighting, and we will continue to do so. And just, what can I tell you? Persistence is an important thing.
It's when we studied in my dissertation, part of the literature review was studying boarding schools in America, and the history is definitely an attempt to kill the Indian in the school, the language, the culture, the heritage, the story, with the cutting of the hair, the not speaking the language, all of that stuff. And it's the same with I think we're just a couple of days away from celebrating Cesar Chavez's birthday, but he tells the story of how we couldn't go into restaurants in Arizona. But I'm going to go to Octaviana, and I'd like us to shift the question here, because now we've done the literacy, and I want to put us into a hope mode. And while our schools have not been fully friendly and embracing of language and culture and heritage, I like to know, what can we do? What can we do different? Because they're called public schools because they belong to the public. And on Yaqui land, on Artham land, they are Artham and Yaqui over there. So I find upon Angie, just before we asked you to go up through, she was at a community meeting where one of the cultural representatives was talking about this anti-wake legislation going on and stuff. But Octaviana, what could we do? I know you gave us the early childhood center. That's number one in the research.
Well, critical race theory is something that many conservative legislatures around the country are really attacking. You see that in Florida. You certainly see it here in Arizona. And that's what Governor Hobbs said, I'm not going to sign this because it would have just really created such negative repercussion to teachers in our public schools. I think what we can do is engage in the conversations, be part of strong organizations to stand up for what we believe in, for the children, for the families, so that and that we vote. We have the power of voting and organizing around voting to make sure that we elect individuals that are going to represent our interests, that are going to advocate for diversity, that are going to advocate for the right to speak our native language, and for our schools to have cultural diversity, that we understand the strengths that come from being bilingual, multilingual, to really learn about each other's cultures, because the more we know about other cultures, we know more about ourselves and what we value in our life, what we value in our communities, what those values are really important to, the core values that we have are of our own heritage, of our own tribal nation, really sustains us. And it really has sustained us since time immemorial. And that's why we're still here on your show, talking about the importance of who we are as Indigenous people, as Indigenous women, and why it's important for us to raise our voices and really be counted and really come to the table when decisions are being made about our own lifeways and our own destiny.
Definitely. It's this attack upon culture and language is great. We'll come into Ophelia because so much of our work is around defending and preserving language. And so, Ophelia, maybe we change the question, not change it, but a little bit, if you could emphasize what we can do in our schools to preserve our languages. I think
Right.
there you go. You're on again.
Yeah, well, over all of my career here at the university, I've worked with Indigenous language educators. The majority of these educators, though, teach in their own either tribal school or language program, and then a smaller group of them do teach language in the public schools that sit on their reservation, or else public schools that are just off reservation, but that's the only public school available to their children. So they have, some say, in the curriculum, but of course it's never enough because typically the language education and curriculum that they're typically allowed in a public school is K through about 2 or 3. They, for some reason, have this in line that they don't go above that, which really makes no sense. But that's unfortunately been the history. And this is like for teaching language and culture in schools, both on and off reservation. There has been lots of headway with tribes very taking strong positions, especially tribes who have severe language loss. And they need all the help that they can. They can't do it just from within the tribe with their own people. They need the support of the schools that serve their children. So they've taken very strong positions and have made that happen a little bit at a time. So we've all been very happy to see that. So schools have a role. It's not just the tribe. Because a lot of mainstream people think like, well, it's the O'odham language, it's their business, they take care of it, but they don't realize that our children also go to public schools which are still English dominant, so that has to change, and people can't see the situation there, that you can't promote language or support promoting language and culture if it's English dominant, if it's an English dominant school. One thing that I did want to mention was many tribes it's happening across the U.S. where have worked with their state departments of ed to have to allow tribes to test or design tests for their own teachers, for language teachers specifically, and that the test once an individual passes the test on language and culture teaching, that the State Department certifies them to be language and culture teachers in any school. But that's all they can do is language and culture. They can't go off and teach science if they wanted to. They can only do that. So it isn't that. So many tribes, in Arizona and New Mexico, Montana has it as well, Alaska, Minnesota, they certify many of their language teachers that way. So the argument that lots of public school administrators have when you talk to them, when they say, oh, there are no language teachers, there are no certified language teachers that we can hire, that's no longer true. They are there, and they are and can be certified through the tribe, and it is, like I said, accepted by the State Department of Education. So that was a big benefit to many tribes here and potential teachers here in the Southwest, for the schools that serve Native children. And then one last point that I want to make, having been in the field of linguistics all my adult career, I've always advocated that anyone who gets a degree in education to be a certified teacher in a school should take just a course in linguistics. It doesn't have to be on Native American stuff, just in linguistics, because that's where you learn about what a language is and what a language does, and all that a language carries. Even if you studied about, English, that's fine. You have a different perspective of maybe it's your first language, but then that gives you, sort of sometimes the ammunition and certainly the skills to understand and be more open to all the languages that are going to be represented in your schools, or the language and cultures that are going to be represented in your classrooms. And just having, that little bit of knowledge, I think, goes a long way for educators. I always tell teachers, that you should take a class in linguistics, introduction to linguistics. It's a lot of fun, it opens your eyes, and but not too many have taken me up on that. But anyway, I always advocate for it.
We're getting there. We're
Yeah.
pushing forward.
Mhm.
Angie, we're coming down to our last 5 minutes, so if we tried to keep it down to like 2, just not, I know, but if you can share what we can do, and I like this idea. How do we preserve language, culture, and heritage? And I think our schools need to be our partners. And it can't be just K-3, as Ophelia said. If other countries are K-12, pre-K to 12, then it should be here as well.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to pull that together, and so that the remaining panelists can chime in also on this. First, I want to say that the program that Jesse talked about, and also Taviana had mentioned about her learning Himda, because she is Yaqui, but she's working with Thon Autumn, so she's learning about Himda, the Autumn Himda. And Jesse mentioned that terminology also, and that just refers to the whole worldview of Thon Autumn. And maybe there is a term in Mexican or Yaqui that sort of captures all of that, so I wanted to just make sure that I educated people out there about that term, because it's a foreign language probably to some people out there. So I just want to say that in my early days starting out at Pima Community College, the training in diversity, inclusion, and equity was cultural sensitivity. And, that was over 20 years ago. And now it's DIE, or DEI, excuse me. We worked so hard to, to have that part of, learning about each other's, across the institutions. And just recently I read that, our state legislature, there's 2 bills, one of them is to exclude diversity, equality and inclusion from the state universities that's out there, and also the book ban. So there needs to be
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to
Sorry, they're
listen. I'm
cutting
never
us off.
quitting on my mission.
Thank
I'm
you
gonna
for
roll with what
blessing
I'm
us
giving.
with
Got
your
some
presence
ambition,
today,
this competition, feeling
Corn Mothers.
positions.
And
Looking
we'll
at
have
the
to have a
in myself
follow-up
and
show
feeling what's
because we
missing.
didn't do
Better watch
half
the
of
way
it.
you're going. Better go in the right direction.
I love you. Thank you.
But
God
you
bless.
won't be counting blessings.
Bye.
And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up,